Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online news summary for Saturday, May 10th. With major national and international events, from the new Pope to the 80th anniversary of victory in Europe grabbing the spotlight, there are still plenty of other stories to highlight. We'll start with stories from Canada's Local Journalism Initiative and the continued fallout from this past winter's school data breaches. We'll follow that up with a scan of major stories from the Canadian press and wrap with our regular U.S. scan and look around the globe. Let's dive in. We begin with reporting through the Local Journalism Initiative. From Ed Smith, LJI reporter at The Pointer. Reports from files obtained through access to information that the number of St. Catharines properties in tax arrears has skyrocketed, with over 2,000 homes and businesses behind on payments. Taxes skyrocketed back in mid-2023 when 6 months into his first term, the mayor raised property taxes by 10.5%. While the story focuses on financial oversight, it also underscores the importance of transparent public accounting and information management during times of economic strain. In Grey County, MT Fernandez, LJI reporter at the Flesherton Advance, spotlights how Southgate Township is updating the rules that govern local government meetings. While attending council, attendees must not disrupt and must not display signs. They also cannot personally record meetings. The council have also introduced a regulation stating members can speak twice for up to 5 minutes before a vote. The revised procedural bylaw raises questions about how residents can access council information and how decisions are recorded, reinforcing the role of clear public rules fostering transparency and accountability. Over in South Georgian Bay, Derek Howard, LJI reporter at midlandtoday.ca, reports that the OPP Detachment Board is struggling to find a place to meet. While this may seem small, part of the ongoing discussion focuses on transparency and accountability, and the importance of transitioning accounts and devices to ensure stronger compliance with Freedom of Information law. Employees have been requested to transfer from personal emails to private and secure Microsoft 365 accounts for reasons of security as well as public transparency should FOI requests be made. It's a great example of how people internal to these organizations understand the problem, confront it head-on, and continue to encounter resistance to doing the right thing. In Manitoba, Maggie McIntosh, LJI reporter at the Winnipeg Free Press, reports that Pembina Trails School Division has launched a deep dive investigation into its winter cyber attack, with staff receiving breach notifications and the division examining what was accessed. Cybersecurity experts are scanning a new dataset of leaked files from 12 schools in South Winnipeg for passport scans and social insurance numbers. Superintendent Shelley Amos said in her latest memo that academic plans and projects from a dozen communities were found on the dark web. The probe reflects how school districts are confronting the long tail of digital privacy incidents, particularly those involving minors. Turning now to broader Canadian headlines. The Transportation Safety Board is investigating a helicopter crash in Whitehorse during a training flight. A spokesperson would not say whether the 2 people on board survived the crash, and the company did not respond to a request for information. Yukon RCMP said in a statement that search and rescue and emergency medical response officers were deployed, but did not answer a question about whether anyone had died. A statement from the safety board says its team will gather information and assess what happened. Public reporting on training and oversight mechanisms in aviation again highlights how access to operational records is essential for transparency and public trust. In Newfoundland and Labrador, past Premier Andrew Furey stepped down this week. While sometimes lauded for leadership, his legacy is tied to a controversial Quebec energy deal. If the agreement is finalized and his plans proceed as hoped, Hydro-Quebec would co-develop new projects along the Churchill River with Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro and assume much of the financial risk for the builds while addressing long-standing issues of appropriate compensation for Newfoundland and Labrador. The story highlights how long-term public agreements often remain opaque, with lasting consequences for finances and public accountability. Meanwhile, in Nova Scotia, customers' personal data has been stolen during a cybersecurity breach at Nova Scotia Power. With ongoing police involvement, customers affected by the breach will be contacted and given information and support. The breach raises serious concerns about how utilities protect personal data, particularly in provinces where private corporations carry out public services. Next up, documents from Ottawa obtained by the Canadian Press suggest the federal government is searching for ways to mend tears in Canada's social fabric. The documents say public education is essential to counter misinformation and disinformation, with calls for measures to improve critical thinking, media literacy, and civic engagement. They also call for simple, effective strategies to connect with Canadians and, quote, streamline access to services, end quote. While vague, this policy language speaks to growing pressure for more equitable, responsive public systems where data privacy, service access, and trust intersect. And in the wake of other school data breaches, the Toronto District School Board confirmed it received a ransom demand tied to the theft of student data. The ransom comes after the company behind the affected software paid ransom in hopes of securing that information. Separately, Nova Scotia's Education Department has previously said that the breach could have a financial impact on some former and current teachers and staff, since some social insurance numbers collected before 2010 were included in the stolen data. This makes clear the growing risk that school systems face as targets of digital extortion, with lasting implications for students and families. There is another important element we want to raise here at FIPA. There is a labor impact to these types of data breaches. We are increasingly seeing employees being left to bear the financial burden of their employers mishandling personal information, facing identity theft sometimes years after a breach occurs. This means that past practices of an employer, providing short-term credit monitoring in the event of a data breach, is woefully inadequate when the causes can be clearly tied to a specific breach that lives on in perpetuity online. Finally, Alberta is pushing an urgent measles vaccination campaign after 3 children were placed in intensive care. Alberta reported 55 new cases, bringing the provincial total up to 265 since the beginning of March. Most confirmed cases are in children, with 77 of those under 5 years old. The health minister said close to 90% of those confirmed cases this year involve people who weren't vaccinated. It's a reminder that health privacy and public access to immunization data must be carefully balanced, especially as misinformation and public health collide. To quote Roger Cohen from the New York Times, "Never did I imagine that so much, so dear to so many, could unravel so fast." In the United States, Donald Trump's administration is asking the Supreme Court to let DOJ access Social Security systems. It comes after a judge in Maryland restricted the team's access to Social Security under federal privacy laws. Simultaneously, the Senate confirmed Frank Bisignano to lead the Social Security Administration, just as the agency faces a massive technological overhaul. Bisignano is a self-professed DOJ person and has served as chair of Fiserv, a payments and financial services tech firm, since 2020. As Elon Musk steps back from his role at DOJ, he gave some vague statements about its future, leaving open questions about corporate accountability, privacy oversight, and the long-term role of AI in public institutions. When asked who will lead DOJ, Musk compared the task force to Buddhism and said it was a way of life, and he danced around the question on how many of the 100 staff members will stay on, claiming it's, quote, basically a volunteer organization, end quote. Trump's health officials are pushing a limited therapy-first approach for transgender youth, reversing previous support for gender-affirming care. A Health and Human Services report questions standards for the treatment of transgender youth issued by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Major medical groups and those who treat transgender young people sharply criticize the new report as inaccurate. The policy shift is seen as a rollback of rights and medical privacy protections, especially for vulnerable communities. Meanwhile, a federal judge expressed sympathy for fired civil servants under previous purges, but questioned whether reinstatement is legally viable, showing just how deeply politicized employment and public records have become. While a federal judge in Baltimore issued an order in March to require the federal government to reinstate the employees, the federal appeals court halted it. The Trump administration faces another lawsuit over the revocation of a lawyer's security clearance, claiming it jeopardizes his ability to continue representing clients in sensitive national security cases. The action was part of a much broader retribution campaign, which included directing specific Justice Department investigations against perceived adversaries and issuing sweeping executive orders targeting law firms over legal work he does not like. Now to broader U.S. and international developments. In Florida, a new lawsuit is challenging restrictions on getting citizen-led measures on the election ballot. Under the changes, Floridians will have to provide more personal information when filing out a petition, disclosing their driver's license number, voter ID card number, or the last 4 digits of their social security number. Also, campaigners will face shorter deadlines to return petitions to local election officials and stiffer fines if they don't send them to the correct county. Critics say the changes limit democratic participation and access to public decision-making, a concern increasingly echoed across the U.S. In Gaza, advocacy groups are raising alarms over an Israeli proposal that would let it control humanitarian aid flows, potentially resulting in forced displacement. Aid groups will need to re-register with the government and provide personal information about their staffers. They say Israel has told them that, going forward, it could bar organizations for various reasons, including criticism of Israel or any activities it says promote the so-called delegitimization of Israel. The move has sparked debate about who holds decision-making power over aid data and logistics in conflict zones. And in Tennessee, a former police officer has been arrested in connection with the leak of journals from a school shooter in Nashville. In announcing the arrest of Garrett Davidson, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation said he used his position with the Office of Professional Accountability at the Metro National Police Department to gain access to restricted areas. The case raises troubling issues about privacy violations, whistleblower ethics, and media access to sensitive personal information. As always, we hope you found today's stories helpful in staying informed about the latest issues surrounding privacy, information management, and public transparency. To help us keep the mics on, be sure to subscribe through FIPA News Monitoring or consider a donation. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Original music in today's show was composed by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. Thank you for joining. A big FIPA thank you to all the contributors, reporters, and outlets that make this podcast possible, and to you, our listeners, who make this successful. Stay safe and stay informed.